In this video, you will see my detailed process of making primitive arrows for hunting, using nothing but a knife and materials from nature. There's many ways you can make arrows. This is the method I've adopted over years of practice. To start out, I cut a few straight sections of red osier dogwood or chokecherry shoots. Chokecherry is a kind of wild cherry. It produces small trees and edible black cherries that have an astringent quality to them. That's how I got the name chokecherry. It grows all over the mountain parts of the US and Canada, and it produces these straight, long shoots with little branching around the base of the tree or on stumps that have been cut. All throughout their native range, they were used for both bows and arrows. Here in North Idaho, it was one of the most preferred bow woods by the Nez Perce and the Shoshone. These shoots have been cut fresh and just had the leaves removed. Preferably cut them so the base is about 3/8 of an inch in diameter, and you don't want them to taper too fast. I cut them to the length of my arm, from the tip of my middle finger to my shoulder. When you cut the shoots, simply remove any small branches with a knife, and you can see we have a fire going here, and that's so that we can scrape all the bark off of this now. You can actually keep the bark as a medicine. It's a strong cough suppressant. The bark scrapes off much easier fresh than dried. And then we can force dry the arrow over the fire and have a seasoned arrow in a day. If you don't have a knife, you can even use the edge of a sharp rock for this. That's getting a little too thin to be usable down here. And that's okay. I'm making these arrows for a short bow, so I use a shorter length usually. I like to cut the ends so they're flathead screwdriver shaped or chisel shaped, and then I just cut off the sharp edge. Because that sharp edge becomes a lot sharper as it hardens. All that cherry bark smells really good. That's medicine for later. Now, as you can see, this is not perfectly straight. But that's okay. We're going to straighten it now. Since it's green, it has lots of water in it that allows it to be flexible. Sometimes arrows are found from hundreds of years ago, surviving in dry caves. They often have little dents in them, especially towards the thicker end. And archaeologists tend to think that's from arrow wrenches. But oftentimes, the arrow wrench used to bend parts straight is actually people's teeth. The one problem with straightening when it's this green is it doesn't hold the bending all that well. Once we start drying it, we'll continue to bump parts of it straight, and then it'll hold it better. I've got 2 more to scrape while this one dries. I'd recommend you make your arrows in batches of 5. There's plenty of other materials that work well for arrow shafts. The shoots of red osier dogwood is a favorite of mine. In the Pacific Northwest, you can use ocean spray, which is also called ironwood. Hollow discus discolor. That has wood that's so incredibly hard and dense, the arrows are almost unbreakable. It takes a long time to dry that though. If you try and quick dry it, it cracks. Viburnum species, currants, hazel, bamboo, and river cane are other really great options. few hours later, the arrow shafts are completely dried through. They just need a little more straightening over the fire. It's really important you don't scorch the arrow shafts. Any scorched spots will be really brittle. This requires some patience. You have to hold it high enough so it won't scorch and let it warm up slowly. I think we're getting there. Just got one little bend at the end here. That looks straight enough to me. All right, both these look good to me now, so I'm going to start sanding these down. I'm just trying to work down any knots. That way the arrow shaft is smooth. It's just a piece of hard sandstone. Kind of feels like 120 grit sandpaper. Just have a couple knots right here where it's all rough. I like to use a short bow that uses slightly shorter arrows, so I'm going to figure out the length of this to trim this down to by putting about 2 inches in front of my knuckle and simulating my draw, like this. Give myself just a little extra just to be safe. But there, I can cut it right there and I'll make the other arrow the exact same length. You can make perfectly flat cuts with a knife on a dowel like this, simply by rotating it over and over a few times to make a circular cut that goes deeper and deeper. And then you can simply snap it like that and clean the kerf. Just like that. I trim the thin end away, not the thick end. And I want these arrows to be the same thickness. To make the nocks to accept the string, I like using a thin knife. You can use more modern tools like saws and files if you want. And I start by giving it a thick screwdriver end. About like that. Just really making a little flat on both sides. And that's my starting point to start a cut upwards in the center. And took out a little bit of material. I will turn it around and do the same thing. Just keep making it deeper till both sides join. And until it's hollowed out enough to fit a string. You can do the same thing with stone flakes. Or you can take 3 hacksaw blades and put them together and just saw right into it. That'll make a knock of the right thickness. There we go. I'll do the same thing on the other one. The nice thin blade tip on the SageSmokeSurvival Bushcraft Knife is perfect for this. I just forgot to bring it along this time. 2 arrows, 2 knocks. So now it's time for fletchings. By doing arrows in batches, it speeds up all the steps just a little bit. So you can have 5 arrows done in no time. Especially if you practice this and do it a few times, you get faster each time you do it. In the early 1900s, Ishi, the last remaining member of the Yahi tribe in California, taught that he made arrows in batches of 5. For fletchings, I most prefer turkey or goose feathers, and you can often find these along the waterways for goose feathers or in the forest for turkeys. Usually in springtime, they will molt these flight feathers. The feathers of any large bird can work. Historically, even raven feathers were often used. Eagle, hawk, and vulture feathers are documented as being some of the favorites for fletchings among many native peoples, but nowadays, in most cases, they're illegal to use. So turkey's the next best thing, and goose feathers after that. And that being said, don't let material stop you. You can even fletch arrows with chicken feathers. Other mid-sized birds like grouse and pheasant will work. The fletchings just might not last as long. The nice, stiff, rigid nature of goose and turkey feathers makes them long-lasting. If you're a bird hunter, it won't be too hard to obtain feathers. I've gotten a lot of my feathers throughout the years by asking hunters to save them for me from the goose they shoot or the turkeys that they shoot in spring. With many large bird feathers, you can actually peel the side with the large veins off from the quill. This speeds things up a lot because the alternative is splitting the whole quill down the center and carefully carving it down so it's thin and flexible on the underside of those veins. It's really important to make sure that all your fletchings are the same length, so measure them against your shortest one. To create the tie points on the fletchings, it's easiest just to use a very sharp knife to trim the veins from the quill. Make sure you get them all even. Since this one's so much longer, I'll do some preliminary trimming. It's really important that you use feathers all from the same wing of the bird. All your fletchings can come from the right wing or they can come from the left wing, but you don't want to mix right wing feathers and left wing feathers. This will cause the arrow to fly poorly. Of all the large bird feathers I've used for fletchings, turkey feathers peel the easiest for me, and I get the most consistent good results with them. Now it's time to prepare some sinew. Sinew comes from tendons like this. This is a tendon from the leg of an elk. I've just pinned it up to dry in the sun for about a week, so it's hard and dry now, not very flexible, and we're going to pound this between stones. That's going to separate out all these long collagen threads, and we'll be able to use those individual threads as our bindings. Sinew works incredibly well as a binding material because when you rehydrate it, it expands, and then you can wrap it onto whatever you're tying up, and as it dries, it's going to shrink down onto that, tightening a lot. It also has really strong tensile strength, so it's hard to break. And it also has a little bit of a natural glue in it from the collagen it's made of that helps it to adhere down and self-glue to the shaft of the arrow. Tendons from many animals will work, including deer, pronghorn, elk, sheep, goat, cows, bison. Large animals have longer tendons, so that's the most important thing. These tendons have a collagen sheath, and these little scraps that peel off can be used to make hide glue later, so it's worth saving them. And here's those fibers. For binding fletchings, you typically want pieces about this thick. Since it's a fibrous material, you can strip it down even thinner if you want. The Achilles tendon and the silver skin on the back straps are the best tendons to use. Now we have turkey feather fletchings, our arrow shafts, and sinew. Now we bring it all together. Start with a long piece of sinew and chew it. If you really don't want to chew on sinew, then you can soak it in warm water. It just takes a little longer to rehydrate that way. You don't have to chew hard on it, just chew softly and then store it in your cheeks. I have one piece over here wadded up, one over here. It tastes a bit like unsalted jerky. All right, first piece is all hydrated, like a piece of wet spaghetti. So we're going to start our piece of sinew right behind the knock to reinforce it and keep it from splitting. You can see I'm pinning down the end, giving it a wrap to secure it. Whoops, try that one more time. Wrapping it just like that. And we can jump down an inch. And we'll start the end of one fletching in there. Pay attention to the orientation of the knock. You want one feather perfectly perpendicular to the nocks. Here we go. That's called the cock feather. We'll slip in our next one. And the last one here. It's a balancing act, and it's difficult for beginners. It takes a lot of practice. And wrap your sinew tightly once you have the feathers all spaced evenly. Smooth over that sinew with your thumb. Lick your fingers periodically to keep that sinew hydrated. Sinew dries very fast. There we go. At this point, set this aside, let this dry for a good 20 minutes. That's going to secure it so you can put a little tension on this to tie down the front of the fletchings. I didn't end up using that second piece of sinew for the back here. So you can take a chewed piece and lay it out somewhere to dry and then use it again. You may find with your first couple of attempts that your fletchings are not very evenly spaced. And it just comes with practice. Uneven fletchings often still make an arrow fly straight. After about 20 minutes, the sinew's already hard. So now we're going to see where those fletchings lay. And I'm going to do one wrap on the arrow shaft right underneath where the base of the front tie point is. We do one wrap on the shaft first to secure the sinew to the shaft without having the feathers in the way. And then all the rest can be over the feathers. This helps make sure the sinew doesn't slip on the arrow shaft. And giving a gentle, very gentle twist to the fletchings so that they will impart a little bit of spin to the arrow. You don't have to do that, but it can be a nice feature. But if you do it to one arrow, you have to do it to all your arrows if you want them to fly right. Now with that first wrap done, we're gonna pull the little tail here to get that tight. Keep that sinew hydrated. Pull the next one, continue the wrap, and pull that last one. Now we lost the top of this one, but we're just going to continue on. Wrap that sinew all the way down past the ends of those fletchings. That way it makes a smooth transition when you're shooting over your knuckle. Luckily I have more sinew here, so I can re-adhere the top of that fletching. There we go. You can see how they all have this curve to them. That's because they're all from the same wing. That's why that's important. If you're using short pieces of sinew, use multiple. You can see these fletchings really lift up from the arrow shaft. I used to secure these using hide glue or wood glue. Nowadays, I really don't like using glue on my arrows if I can avoid it because it's a complicated step and it's complicated to make glue in the wild. So what I opt for now is just a long piece of sinew or a bit of dogbane thread. I really like deer backstrap sinew for this. This is a pretty short backstrap. They can be like 14 inches long or longer. I have a bunch of elk sinew that I use for this as well. But like I said, you can use a plant-based thread as well. Long sinew like this, you can strip it down. One of my fletchings slipped out, had a really short tail or the tail broke or something. So I'm gonna use this to re-secure it. And we're going to spiral wrap all the way up all these fletchings, and that's going to permanently hold them in place. That way you don't need to use any glue. And even if you have really short tails like this that are prone to slipping out from the original bindings, once you have that long sinew wrap, it's going to just keep everything permanently secured. And it doesn't affect the flight of the arrow either. You can have all the fletchings wrapped really securely, and those spiral wrappings don't throw off the trajectory of the arrow one bit, at least in my experience. And plenty of people did this historically as well. It was very common practice in Europe, although I do see it less frequently from historic Native American arrows. So, as always, I'm gonna chew this piece of sinew. While I'm chewing that, I wanna show you as well. Backstrap sinews are way easier to process than leg sinews. You don't need to pound it or anything. You can simply tear the whole backstrap sinew in half, then sinews immediately start coming off from it. That is ready to chew up and use to bind arrows or to back a bow, anything you would use sinew for. And the whole thing is made from that. You can continue to pull strips off of this until there's nothing left. There's not a lot of backstrap sinew on a deer. There's much more leg sinew, but backstrap sinew is the easiest to use. It does take just a little bit longer to hydrate than leg sinew because it's not quite as fluffy, fibrous. Here we go. I'm gonna start this at the bottom here. Give it a couple wraps to secure it first. Then get this loose fletching tucked back in. Really hard to handle when they have such a short tail. Always make as long a tail as possible. It will just save you a lot of headache. Arrow making is a really squirrely task. Complicated, especially when you're making a bunch at once. You'll see how it can be just as complex as bow making. Now I'll go ahead, split the veins of our first fletching, tuck it in there. Try and find a similar spot. Just unzip those veins, tuck it in on the next one. And on the third one, we'll go just a touch higher. Tuck it in like that. Looks like this piece of sinew may have been just a touch thick. Thinner sinew is lower profile, and the veins of the fletchings can zip back together much easier when the sinew is thin. Unzip it right up here. There. As I go, I'll adjust the placement of all of these fletchings. Man, lots of agitated squirrels in the woods today. Just like this, continue your way up. Keep that sinew really hydrated. You can run your tongue against it at any point, and that just helps keep it supple and make sure it will glue itself down well. Man, there's 2 squirrels just going crazy. I'm not very far out the back door. I'd think they'd be a little more used to me by now. There we go. And secure it the same way. Just wrap it around onto itself. Roll it a few times that same direction. Press everything flat. There we go. Sarah will fly now. Maybe I should just take that squirrel out of that tree and have some lunch. So the last step here, this arrow is complete and flyable now. You want to make sure your fletchings line up nicely. There's kind of a big space between these 2 fletchings. I might be able to adjust that just a little bit. That's one of the nice things here. You can continue to adjust things while the sinew is damp. And as it dries, it's going to secure down really tight, and the fletchings will be pretty solid then. See if I can just push a little more helical twist into these, and then try and zip up those veins again just by running my fingers along them. It won't be perfect. This is kind of a thick piece of sinew, but even separated veins work to stabilize an arrow quite well. You know, I think that's about good. I can see this fletching's a bit high, so I'm going to trim that down just a little lower. Make sure everything looks the same and acts the same. Pretty easily done with just a round stick here, no cracks in the wood. Should be able to run a knife nicely along that. Carefully. I know this is right over my leg. I'm just going to go slow and not apply a lot of pressure. Keep this safe. Typically a sawing motion cuts it quite well. With some practice, you can cut fletchings this way just as well as you could with scissors. That should fly pretty well. You can see it's warped a bit. This video has actually taken a couple days to film. Halfway through the filming of this video, I went to a rabbit stick primitive skills gathering and taught arrow making there. And this particular arrow shaft has absorbed a lot of humidity. We've gotten some rain and stuff. So one thing you can do to help prevent that warping is get it nice and straight, warm it over a fire, and then apply some grease. Any sort of animal-based oil works really well. You can use vegetable oils too, but I try to avoid having vegetable oils in my house. I've got beaver oil and marmot oil. If you don't know what a marmot is, groundhogs are a species of marmot. Here in the Rocky Mountains, we have the yellow-bellied marmot. A little bit of grease, just seal that up. You can also just run a piece of beeswax over it. I've done that with arrows. It's especially good in wet conditions. It keeps excess moisture out. But that said, wood arrows always warp just a little bit. There's not much you can do to entirely prevent them from absorbing moisture except for varnishing them entirely. But since we are using natural, easily obtained from nature materials, we're not going to do that. There's our finished arrow with the sinew all dried. I don't currently have an archery target set up, so instead, I'm going to shoot at that invasive mullein plant right there. This Osage orange shortbow pulls 50 pounds at about 19 or 20 inches. So it's meant for a really short draw for snap shooting. I've taken rabbits with this bow at pretty close range, within 10 yards, but as you can see, I'm not really dialed in with it yet. It's hard to be accurate with a bow this short. The margin for error when aiming goes up drastically. It also doesn't help that these 2 arrows fly just a little different. They're different lengths, different weights, and have different fletchings. That's because I made this arrow while teaching some students. I didn't have this finished arrow with me already. So that's a very important note with all of this. When you are making arrows, you want to make them in batches, have the same diameter of arrow shaft. You want to make the fletchings as identical as you can with the same amount of twist on them as well. Do all you can to make your arrows identical so they all fly the same. And even then, you'll have a couple that fly just a little differently. Always hit a little high, low, or left or right. And those arrows, sometimes you just gotta discard. Sometimes you can scrape them down a little bit and get them to fly more true. Sometimes they just don't make the final cut. As long as you're picky, you can make arrows with really good grouping entirely with primitive methods. There we go.